Let's get started. Good afternoon. My name is Dina Frutos-Bence, and I'm a professor here at Saint Anselm College. So I know I see some of my students here, but I'm also on the advisory board for the Center for Ethics, and specifically for this series that is called Ethics in Governance. And so our presentation today is the second of the semester for the series, but the first one in person. So I'm very excited that we finally are able to do an event in person. And the title of our presentation today is Approaches to Real-World Problems, Ethics, Stakeholder, and Issues Management. In a moment, I will introduce our speaker today. But before I do so, I just wanted to reflect with you a little bit on today's program, especially those of you who are in my international business classes. We know that, we talk about the turmoil in the current economic environment, right? A lot of things are still stemming from COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, high inflation, the technological environment is constantly changing. We have political and legal turmoil, not only at home, but abroad. And so we wonder how companies and competitors or employees or anyone makes decisions under such circumstances. And so I think it is very nice to, hopefully learn from our speaker today, what are some pragmatic or practical approaches to basically handle these types of dilemmas under such circumstances? So hopefully we will learn more about that in the coming engaging presentation we'll have. I also want to say that today's program is part of the Center for Ethics in Society, as you can see here behind me. The specific funding for the Ethics in Governance programs in this particular series comes from a $2 million endowment created by the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office and the Center for Public Responsibility and Corporate Citizenship, awarded to Saint Anselm College in 2013. The endowment was created from a settlement reached between the New Hampshire Securities Bureau and Tyco International Ltd. In 2002, and it is administered by the University of New Hampshire Foundation. If you want to learn more about our programming, and we have the Center for Ethics has many other programs, I encourage you to visit our website at anselm.edu/ethics. So the format today, we hope that the speaker, we're going to have 30, 35, maybe 40-minute discussion, and we'll open it up to Q&A after that. Please note that you will have a chance to ask questions or offer comments at the end of the presentation. So we're going to keep it that way. I want to let you know that in accordance to New Hampshire state law, I'm obligated to inform you that we are recording this session, mostly this part, so you won't be recorded there. So finally, it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, and that is Dr. Joseph Weiss. Professor Weiss teaches management at Bentley University in Waltham, Massachusetts. He teaches their MBA and undergraduate leadership, business ethics, careers, and organizational theory and design. He has over 2 decades of consulting experience and executive education, assessing and developing individual and team leadership effectiveness and organizational change. He is an international Fulbright Senior Program Specialist and has authored 5 books. I have the privilege to have one of them here. So he also has served as the chair of the National Academy of Management Consulting Division and the Hawaii International Conference of System Sciences IT Project Management track. He earned a PhD from the University of Wisconsin and a master's MA from Boston College, and has studied at Harvard, Columbia, and the American University of Beirut. So now that we have the housekeeping out of the way, please join me in welcoming Dr. Weiss.
Okay. Actually, I'd like to start with the first slide. Forgive me if the technology isn't completely right, but we'll get it good. So this title took a long time to write because with this book, when I first started teaching at Bentley, they said, would you teach a management course in the philosophy department? I said, what? I said, yeah. I said, well, what's the title of it? And they said, Ethical Issues in Corporate Life. I said, what? Ethical issues in corporate life. How am I going to do that? Well, it took a long time because this is the 7th edition of the book to bring these three fields together. Issues, I understand that. Stakeholder, kind of got that. And ethics, how do you fit those together? That's what we're going to explore today. And before we get into that, I did have this cartoon. Don't have to laugh if you don't want to. I thought it was kind of interesting. Someone invented a pill that allows people to see reality clearly for the first time. I thought that was what my book was supposed to do. All the test subjects died of screaming. I don't expect you to do that. Makes you think, not clearly, I hope. So, but seriously, what I want to do in this, as I said before, is to how do you bring these three fields together? And how do you make ethics really matter? Not that it doesn't matter anyway, but when you're talking about crises, when you're talking about catastrophes, all the things that Dina mentioned, how do you make sense of those? And how can you mobilize yourself as well as others to do something about it? Part of what I'm going to be saying today is the issue. Well, how many people have heard of stakeholders? Stakeholders. Stakeholders? How many people have heard of stakeholder management? Couple? It's a little bit different. So we're going to bring this notion of stakeholders into a system called management stakeholder. And we're going to bring this idea of issues, which we all know, into a system of how do you actually approach, frame, and then mobilize to solve or help alleviate issues, both in the individual level and at the national level as well. So what I would like to start with today is that, first of all, I'd like for you as we go through this to kind of remember part of it, like what parts of it stick out for you? What parts of it would you like to explore further? And how can we help do that with the question and answers? Now, just to let you know, these are the cases that my graduate students wrote with me for this 7th edition of the book. As you look through those, you can see they had such a wide range of issues. Fracking, neuromarketing, opiate crisis in America, Ford Pinto crisis, genetic discrimination, and so on. So does these particular methods actually address these issues? The answer is yes, they do, as we'll see. One thing to start with is this quote, which I really think is important. It says, all management decisions contain an ethical component. Stakeholders typically are defined as individuals, groups, and organizations that have an interest in the processes and outcomes of the firm and upon which the firm depends upon the achievement of its goals. Now, this first author down here, Freeman, he's actually the author of, one of the original authors of Stakeholder Management. So for him to say this and put a stake in the ground that says ethics matters really set the tone for all of our studies and also for these methods that I'm going to be talking about. Actually, when you think about it, if I took management out of that, would all decisions contain an ethical component? How many people say yes? All or most decisions? Yeah, I think so too. The reason I ask that question now is because we're not just talking about business and ethics. As you'll see as we go along, we're also talking about stakeholder and issues management in your own life. And why would that be important? Because as I'm going to show next, I start with the individual who's also a person and the individual who's also a professional. And when you look at what's going on and what has gone on in the past with all the crises, the corporate scandals and so forth, they didn't start with the company. They started with individuals, individual leaders. So to start this whole program off, I would like to start with the individual, and I'd like you to kind of key into it too as an individual. You don't have to be a CEO. You don't even have to be an employee. You can just be yourself. You know why? Because all of you are going to probably become employees if you're not. How many people have a job right now? Oh, well, how many people are managers right now? Okay, well, you'll get there. So let's start with the individual. And in terms of the ethical lens, and I know that some of your other speakers have talked about the ethical lenses. And I maintain that no matter what you do with ethical lenses, they all go back to the original principles of ethics, which maybe, has anybody studied some of these principles in the philosophy class before or somewhere? A little bit? Okay. So I'm not going to go through these, but as we go along, you'll see how these principles either invisibly or not jump up and say, hey, I'm a common good principle. No, but if we examine people's thinking, if we listen to the way they talk, the way they make decisions, the way they conceptualize issues and problems, whether it's in their family or business, there's some kind of ethical principle here that's operating underneath that. That makes sense? It may not jump out and say, hey, I'm a utilitarian principle, but it's operating. And part of our job, it seems to me, as specialists, and since you're getting a degree, you're going to be a specialist too. No matter what the field of study you're in, we need to learn to see and discern the ethical principle or logic or thinking it is behind people when they talk or act. And that's what makes ethics interesting to me, because you don't have to be a psychologist, you don't have to be a philosopher, but you do have to kind of study these principles a little bit in depth to say, what's going on in that person's thinking to cause them to actually want to take this particular issue or that particular issue or not. Maybe they're doing unjust things. Maybe they're not very virtuous. Maybe they really want to go by the ends justify the means, which is the utilitarian principle. So this is also good for your own thinking as well. You may say, hey, I'm not an ethical person. Some of my graduate students say that. I like ethics, I'm taking this class, but I don't get into ethics. Yes, you do. Because when you think, talk, speak, act, there's some kind of principle operating. Now, again, where the field of ethics is going, especially business ethics and not, is that you can't separate it really from compliance. You have to bring the law in. So I want to make that clear from the beginning, is that even though we're talking about ethics, there's some, as they say, bad apples in the cart or in places where they're not going to change. And we thought that Enron was the primary example of some people and some leaders, they just didn't seem to want to change. So we'll keep those together. And ethics, by the way, is not just principles. It's values. It's in the culture, codes. And I put this word oaths, O-A-T-H-S, oaths. That's an important one. And my graduate students told me just 2 weeks ago, thank you for bringing that up. And I said, because doctors take an oath, which has an ethical component to it. And that is do no harm and save lives. So my question to you, as well as to the class I teach, is what oath do you follow? Which is kind of like the doctor's oath. The doctor says we will do no harm, we'll try to save any life, no matter what color, creed, code person is. Our oath is save lives. So think about that. Think if you don't have a code or an oath, you might want to decide on creating one for yourself. Now, the other thing I'm adding, which a lot of people really like, it seems very simple, but here's 4 ethical decision styles that reveal a lot about a person in terms of what their principles are. Very quickly, because I'm going to, in a moment, show a film of an ex-CEO who fell into one of these styles, a couple of them, and then maybe you can help me decide which one he fell into. But one is called the idealist, and that doesn't mean something that's pie in the sky. It's a person who has rules. They want consistency, principles. And those principles may not be good principles, but whatever those are, they could be good. An idealist is so set on making sure that everything fits together their way. It can be very stubborn. It can be also congenial. They can be ethical, but they can also be kind of stubborn. So somebody who is more of an idealist type. By the way, you can take this assessment. It's in the book. Those are the kind of people you just have a hard time arguing with. My father was that way, my stepfather. You could never win an argument with him because he always had some kind of principle operating that he had to win. That's a quick example. Now, opposite the idealist is the pragmatist. As you can see, I've got people up here representing those. Everybody knows Bill Gates, and everybody knows Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King had a good set of principles, by the way. But the pragmatist is the person who says, everything is facts. Outside of facts, I don't need it because it's hearsay or it can't be proven. I'm an empirical person. Well, that's good to be a pragmatist. I think we're all pragmatists. You have to be a pragmatist to survive. But what's the problem with each one of these has a dark side to it. The problem with the pragmatist is nothing matters outside the facts the way they interpret the facts too. Sometimes facts can be one way or the other way. So a lot of the pragmatists can get people in trouble, especially if they're a CEO, and they're really not concerned about human welfare of other people. Just stay with the facts, stay with the bottom line, stay with the stocks, see how we're doing. So that could be a problem. Now, the altruist, and this is a young woman who was shot, maybe some of you, I think she was from Pakistan, but she really is an altruist. She always has been, helping women in her country, helping teach and bring schools to the country. I put her there because, it's kind of hard for me to find out who's a pragmatist, an altruist. I had a hard time going through the literature saying, who is an altruist? But altruists, they go by more concerned about others than themselves. And there are a lot of pragmatists among us. There are people who really would sacrifice whatever they're doing for the good of others. And these people we have to cherish because in my classes that I teach, I don't know about yours, out of 35 students, I'll find at least one or two altruists through all my assessments and all of my role plays. So finally, there's the individualist up there. Does anybody know Sam Bankman-Fried? Yeah, right. He's the guy that's taking cryptocurrency down the toilet, so to speak. He's ruining the whole field. It'll come back probably. But I put him as an individualist because I really think that he was in it to make a fortune, and he almost did make a fortune, except for one problem. I think it was for self-interest, and maybe for profitability, who knows. So keep those in mind as we go through. And now I want you to hear Dr. Samuel Axel, and he'll explain who he is. He was the person who kind of implicated Martha Stewart, the cooking specialist. Everybody heard of Martha Stewart before? She's got a large empire. And in his company, he was proven to have tipped her off to how the stock was going. And so let's listen to him because you're going to hear his logic and you're going to see and think about what was his ethics under his logic because he's going to tell you in some ways.
18 months, none of them has received more attention than Dr. Sam Waxel. An immunologist turned entrepreneur, Waxel developed a promising cancer drug, engineered the biggest deal in the history of biotechnology, and then self-destructed in an insider trading scandal that also led to the indictment of one of his most famous friends, Martha Stewart. This past summer, Waxel became the first CEO convicted in what's become a white-collar crime wave, and the first to go to prison for 7 long years. Tonight, he becomes the first to talk about his crimes in 2 long interviews that were conducted just before he went off to jail. How did you get into this mess?
It certainly wasn't because I thought about it carefully ahead of time. I think I was arrogant enough at the time to believe that I could cut corners, not care about details that were going on, and not think about consequences.
Yeah. 2 years ago, Sam Waxel was one of Wall Street's men of the moment. As the CEO of Imclone, he had just sold an interest in a new cancer drug called Erbitux to Bristol Myers for $2 billion. Everyone expected the drug would soon be approved by the Food and Drug Administration. But 3 months later, Waxel learned from a Bristol Myers executive that that wasn't going to happen. The FDA was refusing to consider the Erbitux application, not because the drug didn't work, but because the data was insufficient. New clinical trials would have to be conducted, and the price of Imclone stock was going to plummet.
What happened was that Sam Waxel did something very, very stupid. He told his daughter to sell her shares,
Knowing that the price was about to go down.
thinking that the price was about to go down.
It's a matter of public record that you tried to sell some of your own shares.
79,000 shares. I had millions of shares at the time, and transferred those shares to Eliza, thinking that if she sold them, that was okay. I wasn't doing the selling.
The 79,000 shares, that's about $5 million worth, right?
That's correct.
You're a corporate officer. I mean, you're supposed to know that you can't do that, right?
Absolutely.
Did you know that the SEC routinely checks the names of relatives and stocks traded when there's a big drop?
Do I know that when I think about it? Absolutely. Did I think about it at the time? Obviously not. I just acted irresponsibly.
You must have known you were going to get caught, didn't you?
No, on the contrary, I was silly enough to believe that because it was such a de minimis amount of my holdings, and because I actually believed that we could rectify the situation with the FDA very quickly, I didn't think I was going to get caught at all. At the time, Sam Waxel was a very wealthy man, at least on paper. He had made $60 million in the year 2000 and more than $70 million in 2001. But he led an extravagant lifestyle and, according to friends, felt a need to surround himself with powerful, successful people, to be considered a player.
How long have you lived here? His Soho townhouse was lavishly furnished with a collection of important modern art. And this is?
A Giacometti.
It's beautiful. And his expenses approached $1 million a month, much of it to service $50 million in debt he'd incurred buying Imclone stock on margin. So when the price of the stock went down, so did his net worth. And he told us he had some short-term capital needs. When was the first time that you knew that you were in trouble?
When the SEC sent notice that they wanted to interview me.
And you met with them?
And I eventually met with them.
And you were less than honest with them?
I was.
Another mistake.
Another mistake.
By early 2002, the government was investigating trades by Waxel, his father, his daughter, and one of his best friends, Martha Stewart, who sold 4,000 shares of Imclone worth $230,000 the day before the bad news broke. When you had the meeting, you said the people from the SEC and the Justice Department were there. Did they ask you about Martha?
Yes.
A lot?
Yes.
Did you get the sense that they really wanted Martha Stewart?
Instead of me? No, I think they liked that they had me. And I think that I got the sense that if they could have Martha, they would be unbelievably happy campers. But Waxel made it clear to the federal government that he did not give Martha Stewart inside information. Whatever happened with Martha did not happen because she spoke to the CEO of Imclone. Period. She never did. Therefore, I didn't give Martha Stewart insider information. Period.
She's been one of your best friends. She's been one of your biggest backers, one of your biggest supporters personally, closest friend.
Martha called after she sold her shares to ask me what was going on at Imclone. Stock was dropping that day. There were millions of shares being sold. The rumor was out there on the street. I didn't return Martha's call. With Martha Stewart's name attached to the scandal, Waxel found himself getting all the attention he once craved.
You swear that the
Only it was the wrong kind and at the worst possible time. On the advice of counsel, I wish to assert my constitutional rights and respectfully decline to answer.
The Justice Department called it the summer of fraud.
I believe the company.
Enron and WorldCom had imploded. Millions of Americans had lost their life savings and were looking for blood.
I was there. I was just right in front of their sites, and I was easy because mine wasn't complicated. There were accountants and billions of dollars involved. It was real simple.
What's been the worst day for you?
The day I was arrested was a horrible day in my life.
Did you commit insider trading?
It is very difficult for someone who thinks about himself as someone who does good things for society to be led away in handcuffs and thought about as a common criminal.
Did you believe you were innocent at that time?
Did I know that I had committed an illegal act? Yeah, I knew. I tried to rationalize beyond rationality that I hadn't, right? It was sort of playing with linguistics, but I knew.
And so did federal prosecutors.
It was incredibly dumb, obviously, to try and dump that much stock on the eve of an important decision. It was like running around in your underwear in broad daylight.
But U.S. Attorney James Comey says the insider trading was just the beginning of Waxel's problems. When his office began looking into other aspects of Waxel's professional and personal life, they came up with a whole raft of additional charges.
There's that great event in baseball they call the cycle, right? If you hit a single, a double, a triple, and a homer in the same game. There is no cycle in white-collar crime, but if there were, he'd have hit it.
Besides insider trading, Waxel was charged with telling his father and his daughter to lie for him and directing an in-clone employee to destroy documents. He also forged the signature of a corporate officer to fraudulently obtain a bank loan, and he avoided more than $1 million in New York State sales tax by shipping $15 million in artwork he'd bought to an in-clone address in New Jersey.
Everybody has flaws. Everybody. What are your flaws that led to this happening?
I could sit there at the same time thinking that I was the most honest CEO that ever lived. And at the same time, I could glibly do something and rationalize it because I cut a corner, because I didn't think I was going to get caught. And who cared? Look at me. I'm doing X. So what difference does it make that I do a couple of things that aren't exactly kosher?
In fact, Sam Waxel had a long history of ethical lapses, reckless behavior, and embellishing the truth. He'd been dismissed from a number of academic and research positions for questionable conduct. One former colleague said, "Cutting corners for Sam was like substance abuse. He did it in every aspect of his life throughout his entire life."
One of my great faults is I refuse to deal with the everyday details that people have to deal with to make sure mistakes aren't made. And I think in that way, there may have been an arrogance where I didn't have to deal with details, that these details were meant for other people, not for me.
Certain carelessness?
A dramatic carelessness.
In the past, someone had always been there to give Waxel the benefit of the doubt, but this time there was no one to save him from himself. He pled guilty to 6 out of 13 counts, but not those involving his father.
What can you say about the negotiation process?
There wasn't one.
There wasn't one.
No.
Did the federal government use your daughter and use your father and use Martha Stewart to try and put pressure on you?
I think that the federal government does anything it can to win its cases. And if I were a prosecutor, I probably would too. You know, I think Martha can take care of herself. But to use my daughter, even to intimate that they would charge her because she tried to protect her dad, was irresponsible, because it's just wrong. And why do it? What do you gain? Who are you deterring? What, my 80-year-old father, who was a hero, who never did an illegal thing in his life? It just wasn't going to, I wasn't going to let that happen.
You took the bullet.
So to speak.
If he has come to the view that he is protecting his father and his daughter, that's a noble thing. I wish he had thought of that before he sent them in to the SEC to lie for him. And then he took the Fifth Amendment, which I didn't think was particularly noble. If he's come around to that view, that's a good thing from a human perspective.
I don't disagree with the U.S. attorney. It was not a noble situation at that time.
We know what the infractions were from the indictment and what you pled guilty to. What were your sins?
My sins were getting a daughter involved in something that she knew nothing about. That's a horrible thing for a father to do. That's a sin. Putting my employees in a situation where the company that they worked for and loved was being mentioned in the same breath as Enron and WorldCom. And I look at that in many ways as a deplorable sin.
You draw a distinction between what you did and what people at WorldCom and Enron did.
Absolutely. I have a company where not one person has lost their job, where no one's 401k has been hurt. So is it different than WorldCom and Enron? I think so.
I wonder whether you're trying to rationalize some of this stuff. And it's almost like you're saying, well, I violated the law for insider trading, I committed bank fraud, and I cheated on my sales tax, but don't call me a corporate crook. It's like,
absolutely. I know I did something that was wrong. And I know that I would have, in another point in time, gone to court, and I doubt that the U.S. attorney, absent other situations, would have ever taken that case to court. This was done because the U.S. attorney was trying to make an example out of me.
he says, look, I'm not like the people at Enron. I'm not like some of the other people that have caused the bubble to burst and millions of people to lose trillions of dollars in the stock market. What I did was personal. What I did was my own mistake. How do you respond to that?
I think part of that's fair. I mean, he is not someone who caused the collapse of WorldCom, for example, but those people are going to get a lot more jail time than he got. The folks who pled guilty in the WorldCom case are looking at in the upper teens to 20 years of jail without parole.
Sam Waxel says what the federal government wanted and what you wanted was to be able to stand up there at the news conference after the sentencing and say, Sam Waxel is going to jail for 7 years. And we are sending a message that this kind of behavior is not going to be tolerated. True?
Part of it, yeah. That's the reason I exist, is for general deterrence. I can't catch every crook. White-collar crooks look at the world, they read the paper, they watch TV, and what we're hoping is that they'll picture Sam Waxel as their hand is shaking to move a column of numbers from here to here. They'll think, geez, do I want to go to the pokey for 7 years? And they won't do it.
Has it sunk in yet that you're going to have to go away for 7 years?
I don't think that it's really going to sink in fully until the day I'm there and even afterwards.
Are you despondent?
No,
How would you describe your feeling?
I'm frightened. I am sad. I'm remorseful, and I wish I could turn the clock back and just change certain events at the end of December of 2001.
What have you learned from all of this?
Never break the law. Never lie to the U.S. government. If you've broken the law, don't talk to the U.S. government. But more importantly, I've learned not to be careless and not to be glib about things that you do, because they can destroy all of the good in one fell swoop. And I'm sorry that these events had to take place for me to learn that, but at least I've learned it.
Even in prison, Sam Waxel still has legal problems. His former company is suing him to recover a $7 million severance package, and he's named in more than 24 shareholder lawsuits against Implone. As for Erbitux, the cancer drug Waxel helped develop, recent clinical trials have confirmed the promising results of earlier studies, and the drug could be licensed by the FDA within the next few months.
So the reason I showed that is that it shows how people's thinking, and by the way, does his thinking sound very logical to you? It didn't sound very logical to me. So sometimes it doesn't have to be ethical to be illogical. It can be just illogical. So, but one of the things I came away with this, and I tell some of the people I work with as well as consult with, why don't you just take a look at this film, show your people this film, and ask them what they think about it. And it's had an amazing effect. I mean, feedback from me suggesting that to some people say, I think I learned more from this film about ethics than I could have done ages in a classroom. So back to the stakeholder approach then. So a stakeholder approach, and even if you're going to do one with Sam Waxel, is that first of all, you have to understand the competing values, the competing constituencies. You've got a lot of stakeholders around you. Hold on a second. Do I only want to show that one? I guess. I think I may have wanted to go back. I just wanted to go back to this for a moment. Do keep that in mind as we go through this. So the stakeholder approach really is saying, identifying the stakeholders. What's the issue? What are some of the methods that we can do to map and find out who's who? For example, if Sam Waxel had done a stakeholder, just a simple stakeholder map, put his daughter in there, put his employees in there, put the company in there, put himself in the middle of the stakeholder map, and then ask what was the stakes for each one of those. What's the stakes for your daughter? What's the stakes for you? And just doing that very simple map with a circle in the middle, which we showed, and putting the spokes out and putting those different people around, and then having him look at it and say, well, what could go wrong? What would then happen to the stakes for you? What would be the consequences? So sometimes this is an important thing. And let me just pause there for a moment after I give you all the sophisticated ways of doing a stakeholder analysis. When I was coming up for tenure, I did a stakeholder analysis of myself. I put myself in the middle of the circle and I said, all right, let me keep looking. Who's going to help me and who's going to hurt me from getting tenure? I put all the people that were going to help me on the left-hand side of the map, the people who are going to maybe prevent me on the left-hand side of the map. And then I said, what do I have to do to get the people who might prevent me? What do I have to do to get them over on my side to help me get tenure? And the people who are going to have to help me, what should I do with them to keep promoting me? And I followed that. And I discovered a lot of things that I didn't know before as I talked to different people. Now, I'm not trying to make this sound as a sales talk, but I did get tenure. And I think one of the ways that this map helped me was not only to draw the circles and put the different people in it. The stakes for me were lifetime employment unless I do something really terrible. It's hard to get out of tenure unless you really commit some kind of crime. But it was mobilizing the people that were already for me, and it was neutralizing the people that maybe had been against me. So I'm just throwing that out now because that really, in a simple way, is describing a stakeholder map. Now, stakeholder versus stockholder approach, as you can see it here, is that a stakeholder approach, you treat everybody fairly, you act in the best interest of the customers, the employees, the suppliers, you respect and fulfill the stakeholders' rights. Now, the people, and Freeman included, who invented or at least formulated this stakeholder map, thought that this would be enough. Thought that, stakeholders have, and stakeholder approach has an ethics built into it. But I maintain that that's not enough. When you see a person like Sam Waxel and other people who are getting away with these different crimes, you need a little bit more. You need a little bit more with stakeholders. You need to help them find out what their ethics are. You need to find out who is more liable to hurt the company or so forth. So you need to go a little bit more into the ethics, and it's not just built into this approach, which I'll show you in a moment. The stockholder approach is financial economic relationships, and we all need the stockholder approach. Nobody's saying that the stockholder approach is bad, the stakeholder approach is good, but they do fit together. That's the main point of this. Now, some of the assumptions of stakeholder theory is that profit maximization is constrained by justice. Sam Axel didn't see that. He thought that profit maximization, sky's the limit. He probably thought, boy, I'm going to get away with all this stuff. Nobody's going to ever catch me. But when it's constrained by justice, something happens. You don't own the company, Sam. You don't own your employees, Sam. You've involved your daughter, Sam, and your father. Is that just? So this is where already justice and ethics comes across very strongly in doing what would normally be, well, hey, stockholder, let's all be stockholders. Not if it's going to be constrained by justice. And all stakeholders have rights. And as you can see, it's not just economic, it's also about legitimacy, and it's about doing the right thing. Why? Well, if you want to bring in the law and the other side of the equation, which is the, not the carrot side, but the stick side, you can go to jail. So we put that in keep that in the equation. Now, how do you conduct it? Very simple. You draw a circle in the center, you put yourself or whoever is there, and on the outer spokes, you put the people who have a stake or an interest. Like I said, when I was coming up for tenure, put myself. Now you can do a stakeholder analysis for yourself. What's the issue or the opportunity that you want to have, that you want to succeed at doing? Or what's something that you're afraid to do and not know how to do? So there's a lot of different ways of doing a stakeholder analysis. It's not just for business, it's for personal reasons as well. But let's keep it business for the sake of this exercise. So you do that. And then some people say, well, I'm not sure about this stakeholder theory thing. I think it weakens the power of the groups. I think it might weaken the firm. And stockholder theory still is pretty important. I think stocks is more important. Now, I used to think, I'm not going to do this in class. It's commonsensical. But then when I started talking to my grad students, I found out that a lot of them, maybe 25%, thought stockholder theory is where I'm at, they would say. What's going to help me is get through college. It's having money. What's going to help me is being successful in my life. It's my finances. So I'm going to kind of keep the stockholder thing going. But then we have to say, well, but what about the stakeholders? And what they didn't realize is that even the stockholders are also stakeholders. And that's what a lot of people don't realize out there in the business world, especially the people who are flying high, like Sam with the cryptology. Don't think he realizes it wasn't just about him making a fortune, I mean a wild fortune with the cryptocurrency business. But what about him as a son? What about him as a friend? What about him with all of his employees that were at risk? He is a stakeholder as well. And this is where, if you get nothing out of this whole talk, is that stockholders are also stakeholders. And let me ask you this question. Are the stakes for stakeholders who are not stockholders substantial? Would you think anybody who's a boss or a CEO, and let's say somebody makes $6 million a year, 60 million, what stake might they have that would be worth more than that as a stakeholder, not a stockholder? Anybody got a thought on that? Let's say a wildly rich and successful, not somebody in prison who is a CEO, making maybe $6 or $60 million a year and saying, I really believe in this stockholder thing. What might be a stakeholder, as a stakeholder, what might be a stake that he or she or they would have that would be worth more than 60 million or the 6 million? Anybody got a thought on that? What about Sam Waxel? What'd Sam learn? That as a stakeholder, his stakes in his daughter's future, his stake with his family, his father. So keep that in mind. So who's doing the stakeholder analysis and who's managing it, especially if you're with a company, not just yourself? You really don't want just the CEOs or just the people who are in charge. You want to involve other people who are going to be affected by whatever the issue or the opportunity is. And I say that because in the book I wrote, when students are doing this, and they're doing it for companies, not just for themselves, is that they should make sure they're involving other people who have an interest that's not just stocks. Bring in some of the stakeholders. So communities or companies that are planning on building a plant in a city or planning on doing something that's going to involve customers, bring them in. Let them be part of doing the analysis. And it's very simple, as I said. You just identify who who your primary stakeholders are, in this case for businesses. But in a wider sense, it's really a lot more than just the stockholders or the financial people. This is what a stakeholder map would look like if you're really involving the larger stakeholders as well as stockholders. Now, I'd have another video here. I don't know if we have time to show it or not. It's about 4 or 5 minutes. Should we try it? Okay, the reason I want to show this one. Did anybody hear about the Detroit water crisis? Remember that? Still going on, kind of. What I want you to do is you watch this. I think we'll make it brief, but I want you to see, as you're seeing this, to watch to see who the stakeholders are, who the stockholders are, and how those issues evolved. And by the way, some of the people in power in the government, the city government and state government, were not very helpful in the beginning with solving that problem, which was kind of interesting.
We wash dishes, this is our dish thing. It's our dish container. We work it out. Our clothes, we hand wash them. It's called survivor mode. You come to use the bathroom, we'll use it. We have a bucket. When the toilet get full, take our scooper, we scoop out whatever we have that's in here that's full. We put it in the bag. And there you go. We have our bathrooms. We've been doing it ever since they shut our water off.
Talk about inequality. It all starts if people turn off your water.
One thing that is beyond debate is that people cannot live without water.
To know in my city that our governance could allow human beings in 2014 not to have water.
We're facing hard decisions if we don't get our fiscal house in order. If you look at the situation in Detroit and in Flint, Michigan, that is not America. That's not civilization.
We should not be a country that allows greed and allows money to separate people from being able to flush toilets.
Let's be very careful about making a doctrinaire statement about whether or not water is a human right, because it may well be, but how do you pay for it?
There's more to that than this was showing in there. It went on to show how that the governor and also the mayor of the city were having difficulties protecting the people, and that particular crisis lasted for, as far as I know, still not completely solved. So when you look at the stakeholder map, you can see that it's not just about businesses. If you do a particular stakeholder map for the Detroit water crisis, every one of these circles would be filled in with a stakeholder and stockholder. And then you would proceed to say what happened, and this is where, if they did that, they would say, you know, who are the stakeholders in here? What does the power of each stakeholder have? What's the nature of the technology, the environment, and so forth? And this is really what happens with court systems. In fact, I've maintained that the stakeholder and the issues management, which we'll talk about, really are what judges do and juries. And you put this into a courtroom situation, and then it's a little bit too late. Somebody's going to serve time or get off. But if you do it before it goes to court, and that's the whole point of doing a stakeholder and an issues framework analysis, is start finding out what happened, because, you know, water just doesn't go bad overnight. And that's what the rest of this particular video showed. For ages, the water in that particular town and city and state wasn't being cared for. And so when you look at that issue as it kept accruing, nobody was doing anything about it. So the idea with all of these particular frameworks is don't wait till it's too late. If you have an issue, or if you see an issue that's evolving, in fact, maybe it was too bad that some of the people in those poor parts of Detroit didn't get together with their representatives and say, let's fix the water now because it's coming toward a crisis. And maybe they did, I'm not sure. But that's what these particular frameworks are for. It's for preventing a crisis. And then if a crisis occurs, it's how to get out of it whole. So I'm not going to go through all of this because it's something that, you know, if you're interested in more of it, you can either, you know, get a hold of me, or some of it's online as well. But this is one of the most important parts of the stakeholder analysis. It's if you look at who is supporting you. Let's say, for example, some of those poorer people got together and said, let's do a stakeholder analysis and let's fix the water. They would look at this particular model and say, who is supportive of us getting this water fixed, and let's involve them. If you see type 1 over there. Who's not supporting us? Let's put them down here. Who's sitting on the fence? Let's put them up there. And who can we not trust quite yet? Let's put them down there. Now, this sounds kind of commonsensical. You know, who's for us? Who's against us? Who's not sure? And what should we do about it? The difference between these analysis and these frameworks is that it puts people in the position so that they can mobilize. Can everybody hear me now? No. So it puts people in a position so that they can say, those people in government or whatever who are not supporting us, what can we do besides just defending ourselves? What can we do to move the non-supporters up to the supporting side? The fence sitters, we want to move everybody up to the supportive side. I think this is what's happening. I don't have empirical data on it, but with the midterm elections, and I don't want to get political, I'm just making an objective observation, is that people can start saying, I thought there was going to be this huge GOP wave that went across the entire country, but it didn't happen. Then when you watch the news, especially in some of those states that was questionable who was going to take the Senate and the House back, you heard people saying, we went door to door campaigning, both GOP and Democrats. Why would you do that? Well, we wanted to make sure that the people who weren't sure, we moved them over into our supportive side. The people who just were against us, we started informing them, we moved them over to the supportive side. So this framework alone could be very important for you, because if you have an issue that you want to solve, what would be the logical thing to do? Who's for it? Who's against it? Who's not sure? How can I move them up to the supportive side? Just a simple thing like that. And we can help you negotiate what you want and help you hopefully win what you need. So there's other things here that, you know, I won't go through, they're very detailed. It just suggests that there's a lot of shifting around. That if you have the maps, you'll know kind of create a map for yourself. Issues, we all know what an issue is. It's something that needs to be solved. But this gives you a bit more of a formalization of it. The reason you want to do an issues analysis and help them, again, I have another great video here. I'm not going to show it. But issues evolve. And if you can take an issue and see how it evolves, you will be ahead of the game. Now, let me just show you a map. Usually an issue in any society, particularly ours, is there's a felt need for it. The need then develops into media covering it. There's an interest group that forms. A politician and states get a hold of it. Then it usually goes to the federal government. It's legislated and it's done. Now, this is more so in a democratic society. And the reason I want to pause on this for a moment is, do you remember that Mothers Against Drunken Driving? And then it got to be Students Against Drunken Driving. And then everybody was against drunken driving. Well, there was a felt need with this particular issue, and it was because judges were not giving any sentences to those people who were drunk, inebriated, and either killed a kid of a family or injured them. And mothers started saying, I'm getting tired of this. Court case after court case, nobody is getting punished for killing these kids, namely my kid, or hurting them. So what happened was they started going to the media started putting it in the newspapers. Interest groups started forming, mad, sad, so on. Then they started getting the politicians involved. Then there started being some court cases, not just local or regional, but federal court cases. And then the legislators, Senate and Congress said, we better do something about this. These are voting people. So they formed laws. And now this drunken driving issue is still there, but not to the extent that it was before. So this is one of the issues frameworks that you might think about. And you can even look today at what's going on. What are some of the crises that are happening right now that might be following this? This might be affecting you, not just something in the textbook. What kind of issue now do you think that's out there that could affect you? Is there a felt need for it? What's going on out there that there's some pain? It could be something good as well. What's going on out there that could climb this ladder, this issue ladder, leading all the way up, perhaps to legislation? How about vaping? Heard of that before? Smoking, vaping, right? A lot of kids are vaping. Underage kids are vaping. Now, I'm not here to condemn vaping, but what I am saying is that tobacco industry, it took 40 years for the tobacco industry to be brought to criminal proceedings and hearings. And what kind of issues happen? Well, first of all, it was nicotine. It's got a little nicotine in it. It's got a lot of nicotine in it. So does tobacco, or so does vaping, by the way. What else? Well, geez, people seem to be getting sick that are around other people, passive smoking. And then it kept snowballing. Deaths kept happening. My uncle's got cancer. My mother's got cancer. They were smokers. So it led to finally that many towns, like Cambridge, Massachusetts was one of the first to outlaw, ban smoking. And it all started with a felt need. So if you're kind of concerned about what's happening in your society, or this could be also, it could be local, but it may turn out to be legislating federal. I think one of the issues that's going to come up is this social media and mis and disinformation. It's right now with kind of a felt need, but it's happening. Oops, something happened. I wanted to show you this one. This is also a crisis management framework. And the reason this is important, and this is medical terms, prodromal, acute, chronic, conflict. This is out of the medical field, but it's been taken over by political scientists, reporters, and in fact, anybody who's interested in crisis management, because crisis is an issue. So usually there's a pre-crisis set of warning signs before the crisis actually hits in stage 2. Then in stage 3, it keeps lingering. And then in stage 4, maybe health is restored. The people who put this together didn't put catastrophe happen and it didn't get over. So any kind of crisis, and this is not just for national crisis, you know, we just got over COVID. I think that with COVID, we're probably, what would you say, stage 3 or stage 4? Now, I don't know about you, but you know, having studied this for a number of years, when I saw some of the COVID symptoms happening, I said, oh my God, I'm not gonna wait until it gets to stage 2. So I went and got every kind of vaccine I could. I don't know about you, but I was very curious about it. And it's because I had a premonition that, this chart was going to become more important. I did take action. Now, one thing that you might ask is, what's going on now in your own life, if I may go to that, that looks like it's a sign of something that's going to happen that may turn into a bigger crisis than not. Again, I'm trying to stay within the business literature, but I have friends who are also medical doctors, and I hang out with them, and they're also talking about, if you think that this particular COVID thing was big, if we don't do the next step, you're going to really be shocked. And I'm saying, what is it? What is it? What is it? So think about this again. You saw the ladder for developing issues of felt need all the way up to legislation. Think about this as well. What kind of particular pre-crisis sign could be happening to you, could be happening to a football team, could be happening to the university situation? Who knows? And what can you do before it actually becomes a crisis? I'm kind of concerned, I was before, about taking away in-person classes. Is the university a thing of the past? Because now I'm teaching asynchronous courses, right? Which I never see the students. Hybrid class, do you have that here? Hybrid class is that some people are offline and some people are online. Now, some people who are prognosticators, that is futurists, are saying that maybe a lot of colleges are going to become the thing of the past. So I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking, should I be preparing for that or what? So this is what is important about these issues frameworks. Stakeholder frameworks kind of tell you how to prevent something. Crisis frameworks say, look out. And one thing I will share with you is that when you put them together, you've got a very powerful set of tools to work with. I, right now, been working with Airbnb. It was a fascinating company. And in the beginning, I thought, I'm not going to use Airbnb. Well, I'm going to stay at somebody's house. I don't think so. Today, that's the only place I will stay. Airbnb, all the way. Nobody could have predicted that. But one of my students put this together and said, well, let's do a stakeholder analysis. And let's see what happens. And I'm going to use the question, I'm going to frame an issue. Sometimes when you frame an issue, that's part of the answer. Just being able to state an issue sometimes is very powerful. And let me just finish with this. So I said, does Airbnb operate ethically as a publicly traded sharing economy company? And is their mission consistent with what the founders said it was? Tough one. So we did student did this. And then they did a timeline, starting with the very first origination of the Airbnb company, all the way to 2019. We haven't updated it. And after they did that, they said, we got a stakeholder analysis, we got a timeline. Let's see which phase they're in. There was a need. Airbnb came about because there was a need. People couldn't get a hotel room. You know what it was? Football games in some of those big popular Midwestern states where people go swarming, not that we don't have it here as well, but they couldn't get a room. So these two guys who formed Airbnb said, hey, there's a lot of empty houses, let's use those. And it's working its way up. Now, as you know, Airbnb's had some real problems with people in the communities who are saying they're turning our community into a rental property, and our property values are going down, and so on. So we'll see what happens. Right now, the students are asking me, well, Professor, what do you think? You think Airbnb's, being an ethically run company? And I'm kind of on the fence about it. I know that they have some problems. I know that they have huge assets. And I would put you to that question to you, except we're not in a classroom now, but something to think about. Okay, by the way, the Airbnb does have supporters, non-supporters, people sitting on the fence. My gut tells me they're going to do just fine because they've made it to the public offering. And how many people here just quickly have stayed in an Airbnb? Well, I think you just answered my question. Okay, thank you. Appreciate your time and effort. And sorry the technology got in the way a little bit, but I hope some of these things can help you.
questions, give you the opportunity for that, give you the opportunity for a question, but I will keep it to one question because I know that our time is limited. So please, if anyone is interested or has a question or comment, I'm ready for you. We have to be patient. Well,
Let me just, I have some probes here.
I actually have a question. Well, you talked about Airbnb, right? What about, maybe this is a big topic, but sort of social media and Twitter, maybe very briefly, kind of where do we see that situation going? Is it anywhere in the map, in the ladder, maybe?
You-
Not there yet?
Pick the most difficult one, because of Elon Musk taking over Twitter. I think it's anybody's guess. In fact, I'm sure there's bets on this in Las Vegas because it's such a huge stake. Will he succeed or will he not? That'd be a great question for discussion. But I'm not sure Twitter might succeed, but certainly we're not going to go backward on social media. I don't think so. I think we're too far down that path. And I hope we are. How many people use TikTok a lot? Usually that's the most, one of the biggest platforms, and it's owned by China. And right now, the big issue is China getting all this data on all of us, and what are they going to do with it? So that's a question. One reason I love teaching this class is that it's scanning these kind of issues and seeing where they are. By the way, you may not have an answer to the issue, but when we discuss it like this, you may have a vote out there on it, and you may have a say-so, and it doesn't mean that you have to abide by it. My granddaughter, 4 years old, they will not let her see a screen, anything, because they don't want to get polluted too early. And as you look, one of the in my book, there's a cyberbullying case, and until students, went into cyberbullying, I had no idea that it was such a big deal. Suicides, from people being bullied on the internet. Anyway, sorry I went so long. I'm more interested in the.
I moved here because the microphone was over there. So again, I think, I appreciate your being here today, this afternoon, and joining us here for this event. It's the last event of this semester and the first one in person. So I was very excited to see you here. So please join me in thanking Dr. Weiss here for his presentation. I also want to thank the Center for Ethics in Society. I know many of you have to leave, but if anyone has time and wants to stay, we're still kind of a little bit around here. But for those of you who need to go, please feel free to go.